Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we'll bring you a special treat, a one-hour discussion between Olexiy Arestovych and Pavel Shelin. Olexiy is a lieutenant colonel, advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine, and Pavel Shelin is a Ukrainian philosopher and a fellow of the Institute for the Future. In this one, they're discussing what's going on with Elon Musk, Jordan Peterson, and Pope. Enjoy. Dear friends, good day. Today, me and Pavel will discuss what is going on with our Elon Musk, and at the same time with Pope, with Jordan Peterson, and perhaps Pavel will name a few others as well. So what's going on? What do you think? First of all, hello Olexiy, hello dear viewers, and I'll state from the get-go that I'll take the classic role in this conversation of a sort of a devil's advocate. So please consider that when I'm describing position of one or the other agent, I am describing their position and not describing my point of view. When I'll be talking about my position, I will make a special disclaimer. Unfortunately, we have to clarify that when is mine, when is not mine. I agree, people stopped understanding most stuff, and there are two strategies available: either stop explaining completely or still try to, but in more details. I already probably gave up on explanations, so at least I'm glad that you will try to. Okay, let's get the bigger list of people we're looking at. It's Pope Francis, Elon Musk, Jordan Peterson, and there were earlier statements from Saudi Prince bin Salman, from Erdogan, and a little bit to the side from that group, because it's rather understandable what's going on there, is Angela Merkel. These are the people whom I would include in the recent weeks in that main list. At first, I can ask a rhetorical question. Think for a second, you can pause the video, what unites these people? I'm giving you my answer. There are several factors that are common with these people. I'm glad we have that stream because it deserves discussing. First of all of them are rather subjects in the history and are rather independent, and Pope is probably the biggest intel service of the world. With Vatican, Elon Musk is one of the biggest technological creators in the world, and all his actions and statements do also show that he doesn't really care about the public opinion, just his fight for Twitter in the United States, as an example, and he's rather free in his statements. Jordan Peterson is one of the strongest non-left brains of modern days. He already created a certain reputation that is likely to stay with him, regardless of anything. And bin Salman, understandably, and Erdogan, these are the masters of the Eastern type of negotiations. And Angela Merkel is a bit to the side because she is not part of that group. This is the first criteria that unites them all. The second criteria is that they all are looking into the world after the war. They have the luxury to think strategically. In this situation, this is a luxury. They're not looking so much at the current moment. They look forward into 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. And the third one, again, except Merkel, may be questionable, they all are representatives of the counter-elite to the modern European project. They're not the elite of the West, they're sort of a counter-elite. They're not the group that is in power, but they're a group that has aspirations to be in power or to get more power after certain cataclysms. So these are three characteristics that unite, in my mind, these candidates, these people. And here we have another question. Why? How would I think if I was them? This is my hypothesis. From their point of view, in my mind, the archetypical task of the war in Ukraine, strategic task, the war in Ukraine has already achieved its result. What is it? Important, right? So this is an old archetype of the stone that breaks a system. Ukrainian war already broke the whole system. Regardless, again, disclaimer from their position, regardless of the exact ways this war will end, strategic goal of breaking the globalist system has happened. We need to acknowledge that the globalist system was not really feeling well, especially after COVID, but Ukrainian war, the Russian war in Ukraine, is the final stone that broke that system. Until then, it was still trying to roll somewhere, and it could be restored via different globalist institutes. It is broken now. At least there was an illusion, right, Pavel, that there is some bright future for it and there were options to restore it. Yeah, I would agree that there were those Davos forums about resetting, reloading, about New World Order. COVID did not destroy these things. It only emphasized them and made them stronger. And events in Ukraine are absolutely breaking it. They have broken it. And the current counter-elites are actually looking for ways to break it. And globalization cannot continue in the world where there are crises, where there are wars, where there are turbulent events happening daily. And this makes it much more difficult to create a complex system of globalization that existed for 30 years in its active phase and overall probably for 70 years was providing for economic growth and rules of the game in the world. These events showed that the resource of that system is running out. And the interest, as was showed about a year ago, the interest of the Western leaders to support globalization at any cost is waning. And it relates to probably, first of all, the politics of the United States. And one can see that all these sides are looking in that context on how are they going to live in the world of the future without globalization. And we'll go into more details on that. On the political level, a similar thing happened. It is sad to state, but there is no global idea of united world. Everybody is pulling their own things, their own topics and subjects. There was an illusion before that that exists, that there is some community. Well, it was maybe not an illusion, Pavel. There were actually a lot of people actively working to create that global unity. Yeah, perhaps, but right now this failed. And the cultural globalization also failed. We have to acknowledge that the difference of realities between what's considered to be real in India, in China, in Middle East, in the West, narrative cannot be universal. It fell apart. It cannot be universal all over the world. And one needs to understand that these events already happened. This crumbling already occurred. And that's why counter leaders see that the war has already achieved that milestone. Another moment to highlight, the war also highlighted the impotence of all the old institutes. They basically demonstrated that in situation of crisis, they cannot demonstrate their effectiveness. And that goes about United Nations organizations and even regional organizations of safety like NATO. I need to remind that formally, all help that Ukraine is getting is not on the NATO level. It's on the contracts of the countries that are members of NATO, but not NATO itself. I have to correct you, Pavel, we got help from NATO. 50 tons of fuel, that was an official help. Well, okay, see, that probably outlines my point. And I'm not even talking about mentioning European Union in this regard. We'll touch on that later. So looking at these key players, you can see that, okay, the stone broke the system, but it did not become the foundation stone for the future. Now we see the fight unfolding, and these are just the first sparks of that fight for what the future will be. And I call upon our viewers to stay cold-blooded, because there'll be a lot of it happening in the next few years. And if you are too emotional, perhaps do not watch too much news in the next few years, because there will be more fighting going for how the future will look in a post-global world order. And here, all sides, different sides, have different priorities and different interests. I'll demonstrate that on this individual example of each of the big players that I've mentioned. So Pope has his own task. If I was him, I would formulate my task as how, with what resources, and how to minimize losses, and to build an analog or reinterpretation of Austro-Hungarian Empire, founded on the remnants of aristocracy and the future ruins of European Union. Are you serious about that? Yes, I am. I'm rather sure. Okay, let's look into more details. Why do I think so? What news are we getting from EU? Italy is on the verge of default. The condition of GDP to debt is worse than Greece had in 2008. Britain last week nearly destroyed their own pension system. The only way for them to support it now is endless printing of money, with the risk of hyperinflation. Industrial inflation in Germany reached about 40%. These are just several examples from the last few weeks. If you think the most advanced Intel system in the world does not consider all these risks, you probably are wrong, because I'm quite sure in Vatican they're calculating all kinds of possible scenarios. And since European Union was not able to demonstrate any strategic vision in the last 7 months of the unfolding war in Ukraine, I think that Pope is already thinking about the future without European Union in it. Why Austro-Hungarian? Why do you bring that? This is a hypothesis, but it connects with some historic and traditional things that I analyzed. So, traditional papal core, Hungary, Bavaria, Germany, they are traditionalist countries in the core of European Union, and they do have a lot of old aristocracy in there. They either never really disappeared, or they got more lands after the 90s, part of restitution effort. This is not exactly visible for the populace, but this is an important factor, that a huge chunk of lands in Europe still belongs to aristocratic families, to the descendants of the old aristocracy. Many of them just own land or rent it to other things, but formally they do own it, and in conditions of crisis, the cost of land always goes up. And Ukrainians know that pretty well. And that mix of old aristocracy that has good relations with Vatican, and a certain commonality in their cultural codes, gives opportunities and right for scenarios to start thinking about a project like that. So I think that Pope is looking into the future with probably that flavor. So that's the stone we have, and as the war in Ukraine did break European Union, their cogs cannot digest it, so now they're trying to figure what to do with it. As for Elon Musk, he's got a different task. He's looking for a way to soften the blow to the industrial revolution of the fifth level, how to soften the blow from the economic and political crisis. His business is in that new level of industrialization, but we do understand that with every crisis there comes simplification. Remember when Soviet Union fell apart? A lot of technologies just were wiped out. They disappeared. There was nobody to make them and nobody to consume them. So I think from his standpoint, he can see that problem. With all his vision, He's going to fly to Mars, and here we have a chance, a possibility that everything in our society might take a step or half step back. And there is another important detail, and I think that Musk and Peterson and others, and there is an element of healthy globalism in that, they do worry about global hunger. They do worry about people who can possibly die of hunger, tens of millions. When Peterson is talking about global hunger, he actually is, you can see tears in his eyes. So it does matter for him. They do understand that the crash of globalization will have its own price, and that problem worries them. I'm sorry if I'm a little too winded, if I'm taking a lot of time. No, you please go. I'll ask a lot of questions later. Go on, Pavel. Don't be shy. I can listen to myself at any time. I'm curious to know what you think. So, okay, I'm just delivering what I analyzed so far. With Peterson, it's rather easy to understand. The task of his whole public life was to be in opposition to neoliberal, how they put it, softer, rainbow totalitarianism in the West, and reintroduction of those roots of the West. This is the task he dedicated himself to, and the war didn't really change that position. Here, he is pretty stable. His task was to fight for these archetypes against the globalist elites. It's still there. As for Erdogan and bin Salman, these are easier to understand. They are trying to carve a better place in a post-globalist world for themselves and their countries. They are in a situation of a cherry-picking, where they can give different initiatives, grow their capitals, gather resources they have, including status and diplomatic, to become potential points of attraction for the post-globalist world, Arab world, Islamic world, if you want to. Speaking of Merkel, finally, to formally close the list, in her case it's rather simple. It's the survival problem, and I think she might be right in her estimations here. She is thinking about Germany and how Germany will survive the next year, because this coming winter may be one of the toughest blows to the German industry, because everything that we associate Germany with, and the successful industry and industrial elites, they do understand that it will be much difficult for them to survive. And Angela is worrying about the future and the chances for survival of German leading economic companies. I think she remembers pretty well what happened in Germany last time, when the industry collapsed and the level of living also went down in Germany. So this was a very negative experience from which they are still running. And looking at the situation and these values of these players, we can come to a very simple answer. For each of them, Ukraine as the stone that broke the system, not as the foundational stone for the future, but it can be interesting to them. It can be of any interest to them only if it meets, as long as it meets their tasks and goals. So this is, as usual, marketing and sales. When you bring somebody to something, you need to sell it, right? In this case, you need to explain how is the good matches the interests and intentions of the person you're trying to sell the good to. The good is not valued by itself. It needs to be useful. And I need to reiterate here that your fifth project, by the way, that we discussed on your channel numerous times, could satisfy their tasks and goals. Problem is that the surrounding world sees in Ukrainian war anything but the fifth project. You know of that, but on the big global arena, you don't see that. What do we see instead? What do they see instead in this Ukrainian war? They see a national fight for freedom. That narrative is visible, and it's causing certain sympathies. But we talked even before the war, and nothing changed now, that every national struggle, every national fight has limitations in the amount of people comprising that nation. Any national struggle has a limiting factor in terms of how many people are struggling. And in this regard, I would say your fifth project could be globally interested to humanity, but national war in Ukraine, even for freedom, it is only of interest to itself and maybe its neighbors to a degree. Also, there is an idea that is floating in the right wings, right circles of America and in Europe. The idea that Ukraine is a battle hammer of the globalists, that Ukraine is the hammer axe of the globalists' revenge. And I think it's faulty, but it still exists. And also countries of Africa and Asia see the war in Ukraine as another fight, another struggle for territory. Those regions have seen a ton of territorial wars, and in their mind, there is nothing principally new happening in Ukraine. So, what do we see then? That sooner or later, better sooner, we need to understand the core of this problem and to answer the most important question. And I would formulate it this way. Will Ukrainian elite start looking for negotiating with counter elites of the world for the future world coming? Because old elites will definitely be gone at some point. Or will the country try to, as a different alternative, try to connect itself with the structures of globalist project? Because so far it is their resources that are being utilized by Ukraine to support its war for independence. And finally, the better option, in my view, is the fifth project that has more implications on regional and global levels. But in this case, it should not be postponed and kicked down. It should be brought up on the banner openly. We need to try to match the levels and asks of this project on both political, social, and cultural levels. And we need to offer a future on all the planes that are more attractive than other alternatives. I will elaborate more. I understand that this is war going on, but all these people, and we have no time to do that, right? But all these people we're talking about, they could pose a question: where are the documents? Where are the materials? Where can we read about your vision? There's very limited material available. I've seen some intellectuals like Datsuk on Facebook talking about that, but on the level of Pope, I have not seen anything mentioned. And even if they're talking about some of that and they know about some of that project behind the scenes in their cabinets, this is not brought out in a global view. So in a certain vacuum of where it goes to, these well-known figures are making statements that we hear about the war in Ukraine. Okay, so let's touch about the post-global world after the war in Ukraine. So Ukrainians treat the statements of all these people now that these statements are immoral, because we have Bucha, we have our neighbors killing our families, our people. We're talking about physical survival of our nation. And we're being told to sacrifice part of that current survival strategy for what? To save Putin? I don't think these people need Putin. This is sort of a functionalist approach here. Item number 1, morals that you mentioned. I understand it may be a painful subject, but you can understand that politics and war lack morality in the way that you would want to see it or you'd want to discuss. They did not have any morality even before the war. When we talked about the global world order before the war, we talked that it is built on not answering or not bringing to light issues of genocide, migrations, and other things. So, okay, I get it, but I'll pose a question. Peterson has no morality? But no. I mean on the level of high politics. But we are discussing concrete figures. There is, for example, Jordan Peterson, who made a very complimentary speech to Putin's regime, and he explained that Russia is good and Ukraine is so bad and corrupt. You know, I did watch the interview that he gave, and I couldn't get this piece when it was snipped out of a bigger picture, but I rewatched the whole interview, then it became a bit clearer. I don't know, maybe because he is going deeper into politics, but he's really concerned about the problem of global hunger, and he wants to address that. And he's concerned that there'll be several hundreds of millions of people going to die from hunger, and this problem values heavier than lives lost in the war in Ukraine. Okay, I get it. Then another question, why do they choose to strike peace with cannibal instead? To avoid global hunger, you can either befriend Putin, try to, or you can destroy Putin. And I would suggest that destruction is easier. I would answer no, not easier, because first factor is nuclear weapons. This is a fundamental issue that can make everything worse. And second is that there is no vision beyond that. Imagine they destroy Putin. How will that bring answers to their questions? In their view, that will only bring more problems to a big territory that was Russia before. In their view, Putin, badly, tyrannically, but he's holding some order on the huge territory which is Russia. If you remove him, there'll be even more chaos in that part of the world. You already have a lot of chaos, and now you have maybe a civil war or some other bickering going there. Well, Putin stopped doing the function of order. He's actually breeding chaos right now. He's breeding chaos for the West. He's breeding chaos, but he's breeding chaos on his borders. Inside, in their opinion, he is holding an order on the Russian territories. Well, but this is a very myopic view. If you look deeper, their mobilization effort, just look into the videos coming from there, their mobilization effort is causing even more chaos in the world. You understand that? They don't. In their opinion, it's easier to discuss with Putin than with Kadyrov. The thing is, Putin is not a true leader anymore. It's only a leader who can appoint and blame during wars and crisis, but now there are other leaders questioning that. They are pointing fingers, and, speaking of Vatican, the best intel service in the world, what, they're not following the news? They're not tracing what's going on there, really? I don't think they are not following the news. I think they are gauging that what's going on in Russia, if Putin's regime topples, what will be worse? It looks worse to them. All these scenarios look worse to them. What will happen after? I'll give an example what can happen after. Russia can be split into several countries, can be demilitarized and denuclearized. I'll answer you with a question. What happened last time when a similar project happened recently? In the recent history? You mean Soviet Union? Before Soviet Union, there is an option of Yugoslavia. Each of these variants brings more instability than was before that. Well, we have practical experience. The breaking of USSR was rather bloodless. There were small relaxation wars, but people were expecting for much bigger fighting, including nuclear fights between republics, and yet we managed to somehow take nuclear weapons from Ukraine, Kazakhstan, other parts, and they were only small relaxation wars, not Yugoslavian scale. I would argue and say they were similar to Yugoslavia. Where? Middle East and Tajikistan, for example, war in Georgia, Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict, Chechen wars. These wars, with all respect to the victims, they are rather small wars. The countries and peoples taking part in that were rather small, and the number of victims were smaller than in many other wars. With all due respect to victims of it, that war in Georgia, what was it? Several hundreds dead. There are numbers in thousands. Okay, I'll take that, but in the world, every year there are millions of people dying from hunger, and 10 millions from hunger, 6 million from bad water. So looking from that scale, they're trying to keep certain peace and order, weighing one against another. I would say differently. I think it's a similar thing that happened in 90s, in 2000s. For the elites of that level, our region is not quite interesting. It is just not of interest. And it is important. They see post-Putin's world beyond the limits of Eastern Europe. That is interesting for them. But what is happening here, I don't see a big interest, full-blooded interest in what's going on and what will happen later. Probably crude picking of words, but they are somewhat interested, but they're not interested in the future of that part. But I would counter that we are part of that bigger world that will be after Putin's regime collapses, and we're probably a key part of that. So by means of that, we probably are part of that important thing to pay attention to. You know, I'd refer you back to one of the archetypes that was discussed many times before, that one of the Putin's archetypes that counter-elite sees Putin's function as building a fence around his fiefdom, and in their view, let him build a fence and live behind a fence. But that's a mistake, Pavel. One can see that this is a mistake. Do you think he'll ever stay behind that fence? Look around. Well, yeah, but what's the worst scenario they're seeing now? They're seeing the worst scenario that he will build his fence, he'll be calm and quiet behind his fence, he'll be solving his internal troubles, which, as you noticed, there are plenty inside his fence zone, but we'll be working on our global interests outside of it. We don't care. So in this regard, in this view, he did perform something. He performed the important function of breaking global order. There is no order, you need to bring a new one. You have an opportunity to build a new one. But here's a simple conclusion, that he broke a previous order and he will continue breaking a new one that they're building. He doesn't let Turks to play the way they want. That's true, he is hindering them, but nobody is giving them. Frankly, because they're sitting on 3 chairs at a time. This is probably the main feature of Turkish politics. Just like in the anecdote, if there were ever be negotiations between heaven and hell, Erdogan would probably be a negotiator. That's the position of Turkish elites. And from the point of view of Pope or Musk, Putin has not lost all credibility with them. He can still be negotiated with. From their point of view, he is still a person who can be negotiated with. I would call it political idiocy. As a person who was sitting and talking to his people and himself in TKG and Norman format, it is impossible to negotiate with him. Well, then we have to deliver that idea into their heads. Well, yeah, we are working on that. We'll figure it out. But why do you think they're so weak in gauging the situation? We discussed that before. Let's say the level of expertise in the Eastern Europe is very low. It's very low in the East, in the West. The West basically doesn't know much about the Eastern Europe. But you said that Vatican has the best intel. Well, it's not. It doesn't matter. They are good intel, but they're not too interested in certain parts of the world. They're strong somewhere else. And they've seen, like you've been negotiating with Putin's regime before, you know how impossible it is. They see it on their side that they had other negotiations and other agreements with Putin's regime that his regime actually respected for a while. So they think they can still negotiate with him, and basically they're still falling onto that old archetype. Here's our fence, don't go over it, stay behind the fence, and you can do whatever you want, Vladimir, behind it. Problem of Ukraine is that in Vladimir's imagination, that fence goes on the Ukrainian territory. And we have a big question, how the heck did you decide to start building fences on your neighbor countries, territories? But if you look from other countries and that are further away, they look at that with much less emotion, and they're saying, borders change. It's a normal process. We've seen that many times. And another factor is nuclear weapons. If we did not have nukes in Putin's possession, we probably would hear different statements. But these risks of insane apocalyptic scenarios, they are frightful for a lot of people. And if you look into the future, one of the worst scenarios is nuclear explosions in the future. We are describing some infantile creatures here. Ukrainians, for example, are not afraid of nukes. Yeah, I would agree, and the world is looking at Ukrainians with a huge surprise. The lack of fear in light of possible nuclear weapons use. They perhaps see a sort of fearless Viking who is ready to go to Valhalla. Well, we don't give a damn. Well, you don't, they do. They're not berserks. Okay, then second, imagine him using nuclear weapons here. What will they do? Do you want an honest answer or an optimistic answer? Nothing. They will not do anything. They'll continue doing what they used before. Right. They'll talk more about the fear of future escalation. But we seriously suspect that America will respond with a lot of might to destroy perhaps conventional weapons without use of nukes, but the blow will be devastating. What will they do then? Then it is one of the worst scenarios with possible risks. The problem with a retaliatory strike is that there may be another retaliatory strike. When recently NATO or somebody made a statement about the new submarine that they cannot trace. It was printed by La Repubblica, and I suspect the article in La Repubblica doesn't cost too much to put any news there, and I think Putin has enough money to do that. Well, Olexiy, this casino is with very high stakes, where even the winning, what are you playing for, is not defined well. So for Musk, the cost, for example, the cost of that scenario is probably one of the worst, one of the most horrible. So let's say that Musk prefers us to be that fried children fed to the cannibal to avoid the risk, not even the actual nuclear strike, but to avoid the risk of a nuclear strike to the United States. So in our point of view, in the point of view of old America of Reagan times, he's completely immoral figure. How do you mean? Well, Reagan went for the full escalation with the empire of evil. They were ready to go for that fight, and they won in that contest. Yeah, right, that was Reagan, but there was a lot of time that passed since, and the quality of and social state of the countries and the quality of politicians did change. I understand how Peterson thinks. He thinks, okay, so in Ukraine, there may be thousands killed. Global hunger or nuclear war will likely kill hundreds of millions. So it's probably easier to wear the pain of thousands versus millions. And yeah, probably there is another calculation that a cannibal will eventually die because, we're all not immortal and Putin is not a youngling. On Kremlin medicine, he can live for another 15 years and he can change a lot more things. Not the last doctors using pretty modern technologies on him to keep him alive. And Putin is not the only figure there. I think there are more possible insane customers in Kremlin besides him. But I think without him, they probably will not be that big. I think the logic of Peterson you described spot on, because for him, even what's going on inside the United States and Canada is even more painful process, because he's concerned about spiritual and cultural values in States and Canada, and that he feels the pain of what's going on there now. So yeah, funny, right? He feels the pain there, but here he's offering to sign a peace truce with the cannibal, with the murderer Putin, to support his own playground there. Well, could be the enemy of my enemy is an enemy, is my friend, right? Yeah, okay, I'll take it, but I can give them my estimation that in this case he's a complete immoral figure, regardless of how high on the social ladder are you, including Peterson and Musk. The only thing that is somewhat excusing them because they're maybe lacking some understanding. But at the same time, it doesn't excuse them because they have resources and minds to understand, to look into and understand the problem. For example, we have Snyder, who's a Westerner, but he understands Ukraine and Russia pretty well. I'll pose to you another question. What if they're just a collection of symbols? That Musk is a symbol of progress, Pope is the symbol of faith, Peterson is the symbol of philosophy or old values. I have to say here that I do respect Pope, and okay, I get it, but I'm not suggesting to play like I did with my last Fagin interview about Mogilyansky Academy. Don't do stand-up here, let's try to be serious. So, Musk is combining several archetypes in him. He's an impersonator of progress, and he's also a jester, a trickster. He picked his role in that global flow as a sort of a jester, because you look at his statements about the world, look at his statements, at his name, at the names he gave to his children. These are actions of a jester. So we are living in a system where the old system that was holding the world is crumbling. And when the world is crumbling, the function of jester becomes rather important. So I would say he is not a symbol or a fake symbol of progress. He is more of a jester who is showing the current condition and potential of progress. It is a more nuanced approach to that. Regarding Pope, it's a bit more difficult. For those who know, who are in the know, who knows how difficult and vast is the internal bickering in Vatican, how much they do fight internally about internal religious issues. I would say that opposition to Pope inside Vatican is way more radical, and I would say they are vehemently more anti-globalist than Pope. At least I would acknowledge that Pope was trying to fit Catholic Church into the global world, but his opposition is completely against the globalism. Yeah, you understand. I know that some of these trends too. I kind of understand. But what I cannot agree with is Jordan Peterson's position. This is the best of public philosophy that we have out loud. There are other philosophers who are not too shining, who are smart and have interesting works, but they're not too visible in the public front. If we're selecting between Robin DiAngelo and Jordan Peterson, that's not the best option. I would say here, Paul, that you are a philosopher of a bigger scale than Jordan Peterson, in my view. I'm very serious. Let's take a look at the Peterson's ideas for 5 minutes. What did he say so principally important as philosopher? I think he did not say he translated. He brought a conversation about symbols and archetypes back into public discourse. He brought religion back into public discussion as something fiery and interesting. And he pronounced competence and responsibility as values, which in context of left vision Sorry, I had a audio lapse. Was it competency and responsibility? You said yes, and responsibility for your own actions, right? Yeah. Okay, so he's not a philosopher. He's a restorer. Kinda, maybe not a restorer, popularizer, restorer. Okay, I don't consider myself to be a philosopher, but I'm somewhat familiar with philosophy, and I know the rules of philosophy. And I want to tell you that I don't see much philosophy in him. I see a lot of popularizing efforts, a lot of efforts to make it popular, attempts to play on the junction of clinical psychology and moral philosophy. And what else there? Some semiotics archetypes, lesser of that. He is using them as tools. He is not building theories there. A theory of social adaptation and social development. He is not even going into issues of cognition. He kind of takes data that's available. So he, in my view, he's the person who, remember his debate, his interview debating, what's his name, Sam Harris. Yeah, did you see that video? I watched it several times and actually was trying to take notes. Peterson surprised me with his weakness in that conversation. Me personally, just watching that, oh, they both were rather weak, right? Yeah, but Harris was trolling. I was surprised that Peterson was rather weak in it. I was writing different answers, watching it, and I wrote probably 500 different answers with a heavier weight than what he suggested during it. And he was trying to build some inner connection with other issues, which is not exactly a core of how you do debates. In debating, you need to answer what you're being asked. In there, he was saying basically, no, we need to understand one thing that is here to the side of our main topic. To honor of Harris, he said he was very sympathetic and to Peterson's efforts, and he would allow him to venture out to the side, and he was basically not pushing too hard. But that's not how you debate. I have big questions to Peterson as a debater. I think this figure has been overvalued. He's got the glory of the trailblazer because he counterimposed himself to the liberal machine. That is a definite strength. But in my view, he did not do anything bigger after that. In my view, you and Burmistr are much tougher philosophers than Peterson, and I'm saying that not as a compliment, but as a stating of fact. Sorry, I had an audio disconnect. I'll repeat. Regardless, if we do talk about Peterson, I wouldn't call him a symbol. I wouldn't call him a fake symbol. I would say that he is trying to be honorable, and he is probably just mistaken about some things. Okay, let's agree to call him an overstated figure. What he did was amazing, right? Because he is a professor. He's from the professor from Canada who went against that machine, and this is definitely a courageous act. And with his presence, with his being there, he actually launched a lot of conversation. Oh yeah, of course, about the right discourse about God and certain traditional values. Yeah, that's definitely an act of courage. So that's his, yeah. But I think as a result of my conversation with you, I would say that both elite and counter-elite, they have a very immoral flair as old entities playing by the old Machiavellian rules. This is the same Hobbes paradigm. There is more evil in human than good. The same Machiavellianism and the same balance of power where you can as many children as you want just to balance your power. utilitarianism, pragmatism, whatever you call it. Realism actually supposes that you have to be realistic about everything. I mean realism from the point of view of the international relations theory. Okay, I understand you. But if you dig deeper, realism actually should take into consideration all factors, including morals, including values, including what's happening. And looking at the solutions they're offering, including Musk in his yesterday's tweets, I have doubts that they can actually build anything because they're bad architects. They failing to gauge the situation right. And this is a horrifying story, actually. Although in my point of view, I do have a window out of it. Arestovych and Shellen following the fifth project is a much better proposition. Being strict to oneself, we're doing horrible work in regards of visibility of fifth project. You know about that. I know about that. Burmisters knows that about it. But the world doesn't know. Well, understandably so. We don't have enough capacity to bring it to the front yet. They do. And the way they use their money, the way they use their influence, they're not using it effectively. And each fruit has its season. There is already a lot of interest to fifth project. Surprisingly, in interesting spheres that I would never see interest to that. But, for example, business or special services. And when I understood that British and American fellows are not imitating interest, but they're actually asking for the translations and everything. Poles translated and made a whole video about the fifth project, the story of Warsaw University, and they're looking at the fifth project as a topic. It will grow. It grows steadily, but eventually it will come up to fruition when the world realizes that the new counter-elite also doesn't have an answer. You know what is surprising for me? That in these counter-elites, that instead of standing against the old world with values and philosophy and works, they're just standing as humans against that group. So they're basically saying this one is bad, this one is good. Like in America, they point at Biden and say this man is bad, but this man is good. So they're not posing ideas against. They lack ontology. Indian and Chinese project actually cause more respect because they have a different ontology behind them. And yeah, I want to... Okay, let's push Chinese aside with their Uyghurs and everything they're doing there. I agree, yeah, their ontology sucks, but okay, let's keep Indian. But this is a problem for India because they're very self-sufficient in their model. They're like a continent on its own. They're like a universe of its own. They don't really care about the outside world. They have a very fruitful life inside. Okay, so going back to counter-elites and elites. For the West, the crisis they're in is a catastrophe that they did not expect. The depth of catastrophe in Europe, you know what's the difference, I think? Counter-elites within Europe at least understand the scale of horror where they are, and elites don't understand that. They don't get the depth of catastrophe. Counter-elites at least understand the depth of the crisis and possible implications and are trying to soften the crumbling with what they can do. And I think that's US counter-elites are doing the same. And I think that's probably the main difference, that counter-elites understand the depth of the current problem, and elites totally lack that understanding. I agree with you on that, but their philosophy is very mediocre, is very shallow. I know a few bloggers in Ukraine with 15,000 subscribers who understand way better the current situation than all these people with money and power. Okay, probable. But again, I would probably hit back at the scale of the problem. It's important what to put on the banner. This is back at you and at those who are responsible for public politics and public sentiments. I understand that there are current pressing things that are happening now, but there's also future visions that we need to talk about. This is a good story, and although we do have a president who is the flag, who is the leader on this right now, he, in many aspects, his politics is matching the fifth project, but he doesn't take the project as itself from me as a whole. Perhaps personal relations or whatever, but this is not being accepted yet. I think perhaps we'll evolve that eventually to the higher banner, but for now, this is where we are. I think it's very important for us to try to do anything we can to evolve the fifth project higher up. Because I would tell you that the lack of such a project or the absence of a discussion of that project, it will bring to the commentary that we saw more and more in the recent weeks. And there'll be more and more of the commentaries like tweets we saw. Yeah, this is a very old record they will be playing over and over again on the West. Basically, I'll be blunt, I'll say this is not something they want to risk their destruction. That's true, that's true. They're not ready to risk their life for that. They perhaps can risk something to defend their own life. And Putin is doing his best because he mentioned in his recent speech Ukraine maybe 8 times, but he mentioned West 20 plus times. And that's probably an attempt to impress on them that is a threat for them as well. And he's having a different blowback because Europeans are already answering, NATO is answering that attack on Ukraine territory is a attack on NATO, and Putin madly, in his madness, got this counter result to what he wanted to achieve. So now the West actually considers the use of nuke, regardless of where, as the too much of a threat. Yeah, but this is also a boiling point, a bifurcation point, right? Because the situation where we are right now and the situation at the end of October may be very different. Right, elections here and there, economic recession. In Germany, they're already talking about when the full-blown recession is going to start. And all that affects who's winning on the elections. So things will be changing very fast. And this is once again why strategically, I'll tell you one very scary thing, God forgive me. Putin, in his speech, did offer some strategic vision for the global world. Of course, he's not matching his own vision. Oh yeah, this is a very matching vision to that he peddled for 20 years. Right, at least he has some idea. And on that side, on our side, there is a vacuum. There is no global idea. All we see is a national fight for freedom. This is not a strategic idea. This is emotionally understandable, morally acceptable, but this is not a strategic vision that answers questions. It's not, as you understand that painfully, is not that you don't have strategic visions. It's just that it's not on the banner. And in the war of archetypes, it's principally important what you put on the banner. I think we'll put it on the banner much sooner than many people understand or expect it to be there. Godspeed. Godspeed. All right, I hope, dear viewers, don't throw too many rotten tomatoes at us for this conversation. I don't see why should they throw that at us, because we're, I think, almost the only ones who actually talk about these things right now. Thank you a lot, Pavel. It was Pavel Shilin and Olexiy Arestovych, and we needed to talk about what's going on with the world, given that, according to Pavel's view, these statements came from Elon Musk, there'll be more and more coming. And I'll tell you more, there'll be a moment when the West will refuse to support us. And we need to be ready for that moment. And we need to understand why is that happening. The West supports us only to a certain limit. But we'll see. So far, Ukraine is somewhat lucky. We're following the middle scenario. Very often, it's been years of us trying to follow the middle scenario, and we're kind of going good. But we do need to offer new civilizational advancement to the world. That's the fifth project. That's what it's about. Thank you so much. I was very glad to see you again and talk to somebody who sees everything without any special glasses or limits. As much as I can. Thank you very much. Take care.